All right, everybody. So, today we're going to be talking about the Crusades. Now, we should have talked about the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages prior to this, but today we're going to be talking about the uh, Crusades. So, just a reminder, the Pope is the one who's in charge. Then we have the clergy. The clergy are the religious leaders that are beneath the Pope, which are the bishops and the priests. The bishops lead multiple churches, and priests are leaders of individual churches. Okay. So we're trying to understand causes and effects that the Crusades had on the Middle Ages. Okay, so what exactly are the Crusades? I know a lot of people have probably heard of them. So let's talk about what they are. The Crusades are a series of different wars. There are four primary wars, and then there's one that happened later on we'll talk about here in a little bit. But they were fought between the Christians who were from Europe and the Muslims who were from the Middle East and Northern Africa, and they were being fought over control of the Holy Land. Okay, the Crusades started in 1096, and they went all the way up through 1204. Okay, so in there you see we start talking about this new thing called Islam. We haven't mentioned that before. We haven't talked about it, so let's talk about it. Islam is a religion that's based on the teachings of this prophet who was named Muhammad, similar to how we have Jesus Christ, who was a Messiah. A prophet is a similar situation for the people of Islam. And this prophet Muhammad stresses a belief in one God. So this is another monotheistic religion. Okay. And the word Muslim is somebody who is a practicer of Islam. Okay. That's all a Muslim is just somebody who is a follower of this religion called Islam. Okay. So why did they ultimately start? Well, Pope Urban II, you guys remember talking about chivalry the other day? Well, because of chivalry, the knights being super bloodthirsty, their code of conduct, chivalry, is kind of failing. And so ultimately, what they need is to try and redirect these bloodthirsty knights in a different direction. Okay. So Pope Urban II creates this crisis called, oh, we've lost the Holy Land, even though it's been taken by the Muslims years and years and years prior, and there's never been an issue leading up to this point. But he claims that the Holy Land, the origin point of Christianity, Jerusalem, is being invaded, and that the Christians need to go out there and they need to try and save it. Okay, so that's what's going on there. They think they need to go out there. This Holy Land's being lost, and they need to try and save it. They need to try and get it back from the Muslims, even though they've really never had it in the first place, and they never really tried to save it or claim it for themselves either. So there's a whole big contradiction going on there. Um, Here's a map of the Crusades, where they came from. Okay, so they came all over the Holy Roman Empire. Now you'll notice my map isn't quite all the way colored in up on my board, but it's fairly close. I do single out the Byzantine Empire. So that'll bring us to we're gonna skip over this video. The First Crusade. Okay, now this is all very brief, very in summary. There's not going to be a whole lot of super in-depth conversation that takes place, but there will be discussion on all four of the major crusades. Okay, so Pope Urban II was the reason that it was called, because they wanted to try and reclaim the Holy Land. Okay, they left Europe in 1096, and they encouraged all of the Christian armies to try and reclaim this place. I keep referring to it as the Holy Land, but it is in fact Jerusalem. Okay, where Jesus Christ was born and Christianity originated. They thought they needed to go try and reclaim that at that time. Well, during the First Crusade, the Christian armies, who were primarily Norman in origin, they actually were successful in capturing Jerusalem in 1099. And then later, about 50 years later, Pope Eugene III and King Louis VII of France called for another crusade because they, in between 1099 and 1147, the Christians had lost control of the Holy Land because really after the first time they didn't do a good job of trying to stay there and actually claim it. And so ultimately it was this massive failure and lost control of Jerusalem almost as fast as they got it. Okay. So in 1147, Pope Eugene III, King Louis VII, and Conrad III of Germany, they all launched the Second Crusade to try and reclaim the Holy Land for the Christians permanently. and they immediately met fighting just outside of Constantinople in Asia Minor. And ultimately, the Seljuk Turks, which was the group of the Muslim empire that was controlling Asia Minor at that point in time, defeated them in 1149, and they got sent packing back to Europe. Saladin. He was the Egyptian king that is going to recapture Jerusalem in 1187 once again from the Christians.
First Crusade was a year.
In from 1189 to 1192, Pope Gregory VIII called on King Philip II of France and Richard the Lionheart of Germany and Frederick of Barbarossa, all from the Holy Roman Empire, and he called upon them to go launch another major invasion of the Holy Land to try and reclaim it for themselves. Okay, there were many different victories for Richard I against Saladin near Constantinople, but ultimately they failed. This wound up being the most famous one, but in 1192, unbeknownst to Richard the Lionheart and the rest of the Crusaders, Saladin dies in 1192.
Anatolia, because they knew from experience that it was A, dangerous, and B, hot. So they decided to go by boat, which necessitated the building of the largest naval fleet Europe had seen since the Roman Empire. The Venetians built 500 ships, but then only 11.
Sorry about that. For the Fourth Crusade, it was called by Pope Innocent III and Alexius III of the Orthodox Christian Church. So now we're actually getting the Eastern and Byzantine empires involved in the Crusades in this final crusade. And they actually did capture Zadar and Constantinople, which were two of the key Muslim-controlled cities at that time. They had been recently captured by the Muslims. And ultimately, though, even though they made a bunch of headway in gaining a bunch of territory in Asia Minor and on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea, they still failed to fully recapture Jerusalem and the Holy Land. Okay, so all in all, these were the results of the Crusades. Okay, they were a massive failure in trying to recapture the Holy Land. The Islamic Empire grew slightly, and it drained all of Europe's resources because, as we've talked about multiple times throughout this class, war is very costly. And so if we're going to try and fight a whole bunch of wars, it had better be well funded. And you better win, because if you don't win, you get no spoils, which means you get no money in return, and you just spent a whole bunch of money fighting for basically, at the end of the day, what is no reason. Okay, it did display how motivating religion can actually be, because all of these people were going to the Holy Land and dying for Christianity. So it showed how motivating a lot of religion can actually be, because the Muslims on the exact same side were fighting over the same territory, because their origin story also started in Jerusalem with this prophet Muhammad. So religion became a huge motivating factor for a lot of people, particularly in Europe and Northern Africa and in this area, the Mediterranean Sea area in general. And what we're going to be talking about next time is English King John and his Magna Carta, okay? And how we're going to start limiting the powers of kings here in the near future. And then after that, we're going to be talking about the 100 Years' War. So make sure that you go in and make sure you follow along. If you would like to go in and take notes later after I get done with this video, you may just go in there and you can actually watch those videos as they pop up.